Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Oller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back, listeners, to the BuckeyeXtra Football podcast. It's Halloween afternoon. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz and Rob Oller, previewing Ohio State's upcoming trip to Penn State. A lot at stake this Saturday. If Ohio State's going to win the Big Ten championship, it very likely needs to win this game in order to make it to the league title game in Indianapolis. If it wants to have a favorable path to winning the national championship, it likely needs to win this Saturday. And for Ryan Day to get some heat off him about top 5 games, he probably could use a win. So a lot going on this weekend in State College.
And you could make the case that this might be the biggest game of his career. I mean, I know it sounds kind of weird, but having lost to Oregon, I think a 2-loss team still gets in the playoff. But like you alluded to, Joey, you lose the bye. You're not going to get to the Big Ten championship. You are looking at having to win 4 games, and you lose your margin for error in case you lose to Indiana or Michigan. And you lose 3 games, forget it. I mean, because they will have no quality wins. And that's just an unbelievable thought heading into this year. If they win this game, then they have a pretty good chance of getting Indianapolis, a rematch against Oregon probably, a top 4 seed, and everything's right in the world. And you factor in the, Ryan Day's record against top 5 teams. And on the flip side, James Franklin's even worse record in top 5. We had a little discussion beforehand. Are they 2-6 or are they 2-7? Well, they're depends on how you define the ranking. Michigan in 2021 was number 5 in the CFP and number 6 in the AP poll. So if you go by CFP, they're 2-7. If you go by just AP, strictly AP, they're 2-6. Anyway, not a good record in big games. And I don't believe, honestly, that Penn State's the 3rd best team in the country. I mean, they're number 3 because they're undefeated. But if you were to say who are the top 5 teams in college football, I think it would be, Georgia, Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. Who am I leaving out? Maybe they're 5.
Miami,
maybe. Yeah.
And yet, spoiler alert, all 3 of us picked Penn State.
we did. I'm guilty as charged, and I did because
you're not guilty.
Guilty as charged, I said.
Oh, fair.
2 reasons. One, Penn State's a tough place to play. It's just a really tough place to play, whiteout or not. The other is the offensive line. I just have serious questions about whether Ohio State's line is going to be good enough to move the ball consistently.
They're on Plan C for the offensive line because Plan C at left tackle, certainly, with Josh Simmons going down, his replacement's in Mahalski going down against Nebraska. He's likely not going to play at Penn State. When Ryan Day gave his injury update after practice Wednesday, he said Zen is trending toward not being available. So that leaves Plan C at left tackle, which likely means moving Donovan Jackson over from left guard to left tackle, then inserting one of the guards in place of Donovan there in the inside. But even that's not a total guarantee. Ryan Day didn't really commit to anything when I asked about it. He said you'll find out Saturday. So that's where things stand as far as the offensive line. I think that gives all of us pause about picking Ohio State because there were times last week against Nebraska where they just were not very functional in terms of what they wanted to do offensively and their inability to convert on 3rd downs, their struggles to run the ball, which now spans 6 quarters, their trouble protecting Will Howard. And Penn State's got a good front. So for a team to have offensive line issues, this is not the opponent you want to be facing.
Yeah, after what I saw in Nebraska, Joey, I think Plan C may be better than Plan B.
Well, I agree with you on that.
Right. I mean, this may have been, I'm not going to say, blessing in disguise, but Zen did not have a good game. He got beat early and consistently, and then he got hurt. So he's removed from the equation, and now they've got to make do. I think that Donovan Jackson is their best remaining. Well, I was going to say best remaining lineman. Seth McLaughlin's pretty good, but moving Jackson to left tackle, I think he can handle that.
The other thing you could do is you could put George Fitzpatrick there at left tackle. You could move Tegra Shabola from right guard to left tackle. In any of the cases, though, it's going to be a new front. But I have a hard time envisioning them being a significant downgrade from what we saw last weekend, because they really struggled on the left side to protect Will Howard. I mean, there were 2 sacks. It was a fumble both from the left side of the line. So they need to figure stuff out or try to mask some of their issues there, because this is a matchup where somebody like Abdul Carter is going to be in a favorable spot to get after Will Howard.
With all that being said, and again, I have the same concerns, as I said, about the offensive line. I do think that a couple things. One, I've learned, having covered the sport a long time, that this is a week-to-week proposition. What happens one week doesn't really have a bearing on what happens the next week, which would be good for Ohio State because they didn't play very well against Nebraska. Second, I still think that Ohio State has better talent across the board than Penn State. No more glaring than a wide receiver. I mean, Penn State's receivers are possession receivers. They're not deep threats. They just not who they are. I watched them go out and heave the ball 50 yards and score 3 touchdowns. But Julian Fleming, the former Buckeye, is one of the receivers. Ohio State's receivers are as good as it gets. Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Carnell Tate. And you figure that they've emphasized, and Chip Kelly's done something to tweak the run blocking scheme to give spaces for Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is, but they have to have figured out a way. And then I think Ohio State's defense is really good. I just, I think that, if they can slow down Tyler Warren, their tight end, who hit 17 catches against USC, 17, right? It's crazy. I don't see how Penn State consistently scores against Ohio State.
I think Will Howard has to have a big game. I think he has to have a clean game, and I think he has to show that he can win a game in the fourth quarter or with under pressure, under duress. It's the same thing we said about Kyle McCord last year when he did show it against Notre Dame, and that was kind of the high water mark for Kyle McCord. He proved he could do it. Will Howard really, had that chance against Oregon. Didn't work out. Not all his fault. Not laying all this on him, but I think he has to have a big game, and I think Penn State's going to make it difficult for him to have the kind of game I think he needs to have to take pressure off the running game. I mean, it's backward, right? Usually it's like you run the ball to open up the pass. At least that's old school thinking. With Ohio State now, they're going to have to pass to open up the run. And Bill, you're right; they have better talent. But as it is with these games, it's not so much the total amount of talent; it's where is that talent?
Right.
Right.
No, I agree. That's why I picked Penn State. I mean, also, in fairness, I pick Ohio State every week. Every week we almost invariably pick Ohio State. I think Georgia.
What's interesting is you said it was a tough place to play, and like conventional wisdom is it is a tough place to play. But Ohio State, it hasn't really been that tough a place in terms to win at for Ohio State.
16 lost.
As good as that environment is, there's the James Franklin effect.
Yeah.
Which is they win sometimes seemingly in spite of James Franklin. Maybe that's a little unfair, but I have always said from day one that James Franklin kind of is a car salesman, and I think he's better than that. He surprised me a couple times, but I think there is some substance, but there's definite style, and that's what James Franklin brings is sort of a style over substance would be my take. I'd love to know really what Penn State fans think about him. I think they would switch it out. Ryan Day's under fire, in Columbus, although you don't know if that's a vocal minority or not, but James Franklin has to be feeling the heat there. I think Bill already alluded to it with his record against top 5 and really good teams.
Yeah, I think it's 1-9. I think that's what the record is.
Yeah, this is big for both coaches, both their own narratives, because whoever is the loser of this game is going to attract even more questions and all that. Although even if Penn State loses, I mean, they're still probably in line to make the playoff, and I think for them, having not been on that stage is important. But for Ohio State, I think even Ryan Day might even have more at the line in this one, because this was a team that was number 2 in the preseason with all the returning talent. And if you lose, it's going to be very difficult to make the Big Ten title game because you'll have 2 losses and there'll be 3 unbeaten teams in conference play. And 2 of those unbeaten teams, Penn State and Oregon, you won't have the head-to-head tiebreaker with. So it's going to be a very uphill road to even make a Big Ten championship. And if you do make the playoff as a 2-loss team, and I think you would make ultimately in that situation, you're probably playing on the road in the first round. I don't know if you're going to host a playoff game, so that's also a unique situation where you're going to go play in late December somewhere. It's going to be a big crowd for the first ever on-campus playoff game. So lot really riding on this one for Ohio State's postseason fortunes.
Yeah, we talked about Ohio State's injury. We didn't mention Penn State's. They have even bigger issues at quarterback. We don't know if Drew Aller is going to play. He hurt his knee against Wisconsin last week. Did not play in the second half. We remember how awful he was against Ohio State last year. He's better this year. I don't look if he was that bad, as bad against Ohio State as he is everywhere else, or as bad as what I'm saying. If he was that bad every week, he wouldn't be the starting quarterback very long. But he is a 5-star guy. He's talented. He's played better this year. I don't think he's dynamic. And with a bad knee, he'll be less dynamic. But if he can't go, then they have Bo Perbula, who is much more of a dual threat, probably a run-first quarterback. And those kind of guys have given Ohio State struggles over the years. He can throw it too, but he's probably better as a runner. And just the idea that you don't know what you're facing. And you got to prepare for both guys because it's very different styles.
Well, I think you look at last week's game, the times where Dylan Raiola was able to break free from the pocket and scramble for yards. So that's been an ongoing thing for Ohio State in the last couple of weeks. Dylan Gabriel had a big run late in the game. So they need to, when they bring pressure, they'll need to tighten stuff. But they've had trouble with some of the mobile quarterbacks lately.
I'll be honest. I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State just goes in there and just beats them. I mean, just controls the game. I mean, if they can block, because I just don't know. I mean, Oregon beat Ohio State mainly with explosive plays. And I think Jordan James was a really good running back for Oregon. Penn State's got a couple of good running backs, Nick Singleton, but he's been a little nicked up. And so I don't know that Penn State has the number of an explosive kind of weapons that Oregon did. And Denzel Burke's not going to have that kind of game again. I mean, that was just kind of a game for the ages in the wrong way.
Look, I don't think, I mean, I picked Penn State to win as well. And I think you almost have to, just academically speaking, when you look at the state of Ohio State's offensive line and how that limits what they want to do. But with that being said, it's not hard to draw up a situation where Ohio State goes in the Happy Valley and wins by a score or two, because one, they have great weapons still. They can make explosive plays. They had that seamless drive in the fourth quarter. I mean, they have guys like Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and weapons that Penn State does not have. There's a big gap with these two teams in terms of the explosive plays that they generate. Penn State has 13 plays of 30 yards or more, which is 94th in the FBS. Ohio State has 17 plays of 30 yards or more. That's 21st nationally. Or no, sorry, 21 plays of 30 yards or more. That's 17th nationally. So even if they have struggled at time to run the ball, there are going to be opportunities for them to break off big plays. And then the other factor is James Franklin, who I still don't think is great in these big games. I mean, they call him Big Game James, ironically. And you think back to last year's game where they came to Columbus and had a chance to win that, and Drew Aller struggling to throw the football, and they insist on throwing 42 times with him, and they have a good running back tandem and Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, and they didn't run the ball. So those are the two reasons I think, if you were to think about it, why Ohio State could win this game, is they can out-athlete Penn State on the perimeter, and then James Franklin's a total wild card in this situation.
I think I agree with what both of you are saying. I can see Ohio State going in there and winning by a couple of scores. I think it gets more challenging. We've talked about the offensive line, but Ohio State's defensive line, I think Ohio State's best asset right now, other than the skill positions on offense, are, the guys we haven't heard a lot about this year's defensive ends and just getting pressure on the Penn State quarterback. I think if you pressure Penn State's quarterback, it's going to be a long afternoon for the Nittany Lions. I think that they really get after whoever the quarterback is. I think if they can get that pressure and contain, then they've got a really pretty good shot. Obviously, I picked Penn State, so I didn't think that they probably will get that kind of pressure based, to use Joey's term, academically. Wasn't that your word, Joey?
Yeah.
Academically speaking, Ohio State hasn't gotten a ton of pressure on quarterbacks this season. There's been some uptick at times, but so I guess I just don't probably see that happening, that they will get the pressure that I think they need to really, quote, dominate the game.
I will say the issue with sacks has been a thing in big games, especially against Michigan, especially against Oregon. It's not been an issue against Penn State, and maybe that's just Larry Johnson getting his position group eager to play against his former school, but they've averaged 4 sacks every year against Penn State since Larry Johnson's been with Ohio State. And that's been the case recently, where they've had some really big performances. You had Chase Young in 2019. You had JT Tuimoloau in 22. You have Jerron Cage's scoop and score for a touchdown in 21. They've typically had big performances from the defensive line in these games. That has certainly been a trend. And I don't know if Penn State's offensive line is all that special. So, I mean, I think Ohio State's defense made some progress against Nebraska last week. And maybe they'll have one of their vintage showings against Penn State. I expect this game not to be all that terribly high scoring, because I think Ohio State's defense is still good. I think Oregon's one of the best offenses they've faced. They held Oregon to 31. I think they can keep Penn State into the low 20s or mid 20s. Questions whether Ohio State can do enough offensively, can push closer to the 30-point marker.
It was actually 32 against Oregon, Joey, which kind of made a difference.
I mean, low 30s. Didn't have the.
I know what you meant. Penn State's offensive line might be missing their right tackle. He has been in and out last few weeks and didn't play the second half against Wisconsin. So that's something to look out. And one of their other starting defensive end is out. So they've got their own injury issues. It's a fascinating game on a lot of levels. And this is a crossroads game. This will determine whether Ohio State gets the Big Ten championship, probably, whether they secure a spot in the playoff or have to scrap for it. Can you imagine the pressure if they lose this game, and they're not going to lose to Purdue and Northwestern, but Indiana, who would have said at the beginning of the year Indiana could
a must-win game,
at home against Indiana, but that's what it is. So and then Michigan and I know Michigan's down, but
still a rivalry.
Imagine the pressure of that game. So this game is so important for Ohio State. So important.
I think they need a win also just from the standpoint of something to feel good about themselves, some juice, some life. And you just think about that side of thing, the intangibles, the mental state of this team. I mean, if they lose 2 games, I just think there's going to be a lot of outside noise, and that is draining on a team. And guys talked about the Oregon loss, maybe bringing them back down to earth. But I think this team needs some positive momentum going forward, because you think about, sure, they had a great offseason and all that, but they have not really had a win in a long time where they could feel really good about themselves. Maybe last year at Notre Dame. The Penn State game last October felt like such a slugfest. It was almost like who lost that game. It was just not a well-played game, and really that was the Marvin Harrison show. But I think they need a win to feel good about themselves, and they just have not had that this year, in part because of the schedule and losing by a point at Oregon. So I think from just that side of the coin, I think is important too, because there's a situation where they lose and their back's against the wall and they really rally around. But I think this team needs some life in it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say that this is a big Ryan Day game, and he better win it. If you're Ryan Day, like Bill's talked about the pressure, mean, look ahead to Michigan. There might be more pressure because Michigan's not good, right? It's like you've got to win that game. But to your point, Joey, they've had 3 weeks now of not feeling really good about themselves. They had the Oregon loss, the bye week. I'm sorry, they were idle. Don't want to get that wrong. Joey always says wasn't a bye week. They were off. They were idle. And then Nebraska, which they won the game. I think it's funny because, Urban Meyer was always, what's the best thing about being, 3-0, chance to be 4-0. So he was all about just win. It didn't matter how it looked. But Ryan Day doesn't seem to get the benefit of that doubt as much. And so the Nebraska game, it was a win that didn't feel like a loss, but didn't really feel like a win all that much. So to your point, 3 weeks of kind of the blahs and not feeling good about yourself. I mean, even as we're talking about this, suddenly I'm thinking, this game's bigger than I thought it was.
Well, it'll be upon us soon enough.
I mean, it's a big game, but last year's Michigan game felt like a big game too because they had their playoff hopes riding on this. I mean, this is a big game in terms of they need to create some positive momentum. But all that said, they could lose the game and still make the playoff and win the national championship. So, but if they do lose, you're going to lose the chance to win a Big Ten championship. And they talk about their goals are to beat Michigan, to win the Big Ten, to win a national championship. So it would be the first weekend in November, and already one of those 3 is at a play, and I think that would sting. And certainly,
although I'll close this up on this again. If you want to be the glass half full person, entering the season, you thought, they could lose at Oregon. It's gonna be a tough game. Sure, they did, sure. And then you said, they could lose at Penn State. It's always a tough place to play, and they could. So, it's not shocking. I mean, I think the way things have kind of gone down, it's like, this team is in turmoil and this team isn't as good as we thought. And maybe they're not, but they haven't lost to Penn State yet, right? They haven't lost to Penn State. And it's like they could have lost at Oregon. I had them losing a game this year, and I think I had it being Oregon. So, I'm on track for it, in my view, this is where they should be. Now, how they've looked is a different story, and I think that's really what we're getting at here. Is they didn't look great against Nebraska by any means.
The problem with them losing this game is also the idea where you look at what Ryan Day inherited in 19 and 20, and then they start to have a Michigan problem and lose in 21 and 22, and that's the team you got to eclipse. Then Oregon joins the Big Ten, and now it's got 2 wins over you, and you've beaten Penn State every year. Then if you start losing to Penn State, it feels like you are going down in the Big Ten pecking order. So I think it would sort of keep calm in Columbus. And I mean, there's that anxiety, I think, is just around the program, and it's bad vibes, bad momentum. So you need to do something to help with that. And if they do win this game, they control their own destiny for getting to Indianapolis, because they are the only 1-loss team left. Everybody else has got 2 losses. There are 3 unbeaten teams, but they played 2 of the unbeaten teams in Penn State and Indiana. So if they go 5-0 the rest of the way, they're gonna set up a rematch with Oregon, and hey, maybe they'll achieve at least 2 of the 3 goals, and maybe then 3 at that point.
I think that pretty much covers it, right?
Bill's
got somewhere to go, apparently.
I know, but I don't want to belabor it. We've talked. I think we've talked about all we need to talk about this game until they play it.
The narrative. It's the narrative bowl. It's a big game for the narratives. Choose your own narrative. Which coach can win the big game, or if you don't like that angle, you can take the loser and just write about that coach. Why can't he win the big game? Or
there it is.
So that's where things stand. Ohio State, Penn State, the second top 5 matchup we'll cover in a span of 3 games. Should be fun, should be compelling at the very least in Happy Valley on Saturday afternoon. Thanks for joining us on the BuckeyeXtra Football podcast, and visit dispatch.com/sports for all our content in the lead up to kickoff. Thanks for listening.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.